What happens when fame, power, and wealth collide with unchecked impulses and tortured souls? The result was often chaos. Beautiful, destructive chaos that shaped the very foundation of American cinema. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 20 actors who weren't just playing dangerous characters on screen. They were living dangerously off-screen. Their wild behavior, reckless lifestyles, and self-destructive tendencies would have ended careers instantly in today's world. But in old Hollywood, these were the men who made the rules, only to break them spectacularly. Let's dive into the shadowy world of Hollywood's most dangerous and out-of-control legends. Errol Flynn. With his elegant looks, charming voice, and unruly demeanor, Errol Flynn quickly became an iconic Hollywood hero of the 1930s and 1940s. But behind the glamorous roles was a life more dramatic than any script ever written. Flynn wasn't just playing pirates and adventurers. He was living as one, sailing through life with reckless abandon and leaving destruction in his wake. By the 1940s, his offset stories began to attract more attention than his acting career. His lavish parties, controversial relationships, and out-of-the-ordinary lifestyle made Flynn a regular fixture in the headlines, not for his movies, but for his scandals. He once claimed to love booze and adventure above all else, and it was believed that Flynn's mansion was not only a residence, but also a secretive hub frequented by many famous people, with rumors that were never confirmed but never quite died either. In 1942, at the height of his fame, Flynn was charged with statutory rape, though he was eventually acquitted. The scandal would have destroyed any other actor's career, but somehow Flynn emerged with his bad boy image merely enhanced. His drinking grew more excessive, his behavior more erratic, and his reputation more notorious. During the war, rumors of unclear connections and activities added to Flynn's mystery. Although there was no concrete evidence, these suspicions followed him for the rest of his life, inseparable from his reputation. Directors described him as brilliant but dangerous, never knowing when he might disappear from set for days without explanation. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando didn't just make waves in Hollywood. He created an earthquake. This volcano of talent took the film world by storm when he appeared in A Streetcar Named Desire, forever changing the landscape of acting. Every time he stepped on screen, the gap between acting and real life seemed to disappear. But like all natural forces, behind that brilliance was a deep inner turmoil that few could comprehend. Brando was known for his erratic temperament, intense emotions, and complex personal relationships that defied conventional norms. He once said, "I'm not sure if the real me survives the fame." It seemed that the spotlight had become a shadow he couldn't escape. On set, he was a revolutionary but impossible presence, refusing to memorize lines and bullying co-stars. He arrived overweight and unprepared for Apocalypse Now, causing chaos and delays while demanding major rewrites. He hated authority with a passion that bordered on obsession. Directors and producers walked on eggshells around him, knowing that one wrong word could trigger his volatile temper. His relationships were chaotic, and he fathered at least 11 children with different women. Home life was reportedly controlling and distant, a stark contrast to the emotional vulnerability he showed on screen. The darkest chapter of Brando's life came when his son Christian was involved in the killing of his sister's boyfriend. Brando broke down in court, admitting that his neglect as a father had contributed to the tragedy. His family was plagued by addiction, violence, and heartbreak. Later, his daughter's suicide would further shatter him emotionally. Brando was not afraid to confront the system. He challenged old Hollywood conventions and once refused to accept an Oscar for his role in The Godfather, in protest of social injustice, a shocking act at the time. His co-stars described him as a strange combination of genius and mystery, able to flare up one moment, then retreat as if he had never existed. Brando lived as if he were in a constant dialogue with himself. And perhaps that is why audiences could not take their eyes off him, because every time he appeared, It was not just a role. It was a soul glowing from within, sometimes warming, sometimes burning everything around it. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum didn't just play anti-heroes. He was one in real life. With his stylish slouch, husky voice, and irreverent demeanor, Mitchum wore his rebellion as part of his identity. He was a ticking time bomb disguised as Hollywood's coolest customer, and the industry both feared and revered him for it. In 1948, Mitchum was arrested at a Hollywood party for marijuana possession. While the scandal would have ruined anyone else's career, his nonchalant response made headlines. "That's like getting arrested for holding a beer can," he said with a shrug that the nation would never forget. Instead of going downhill, Mitchum emerged from prison with a bigger reputation than before. The incident didn't destroy his image. It made him an uncontrollable icon. Hollywood soon learned that Mitchum's dark side made him not only remarkable, but irreplaceable. He lived up to what audiences saw on screen: tough, unpredictable, and fearless. Behind-the-scenes stories of his fights, his backtalk to directors, and his frequent abandonment of lines to improvise have become film industry legend. Mitchum didn't like rules, and audiences loved it. He drank heavily, picked fights in bars, and was constantly surrounded by chaos. Directors described him as both brilliant and dangerous, never knowing when he'd explode or simply vanish from set without warning. Crew members said he was impossible to control and often pushed boundaries just to see how far he could go. When asked how he differs from the anti-heroes he's played, Mitchum simply chuckled, "I don't shoot people." His answer was short, cool, and completely his own. In a world where many stars tried to maintain a polished image, Robert Mitchum stood out for his authenticity, his wildness, and his unmistakable style. He lived recklessly, but he was always in control of the storm he created, making him one of Hollywood's most respected outlaws. James Dean. James Dean only made 3 big movies, but they were enough to make him an immortal legend. With his dark eyes, uncertain demeanor, and innate rebellious temperament, Dean was the perfect embodiment of the post-war youth crisis. Movies like Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant left a deep impression on audiences, making his image not just attached to the screen, but becoming a symbol of a generation struggling with themselves in a turbulent world. However, behind those cultural icons was a young man with a troubled soul and a dangerous personality. Dean had mood swings, clashed with directors, and acted out on set. He once stormed off a film shoot after a violent argument with the crew. His relationships were short and intense, filled with emotional explosions that left everyone around him reeling. Dean was addicted to speed. He drove motorcycles and raced sports cars, especially the silver Porsche he called Little Bastard. His friends lived in fear whenever he drove. Dean never obeyed traffic laws, ran red lights, revved his engine past the limit, and laughed as he recounted his near-death experiences. More frighteningly, he once admitted to a reporter, "I live as if I were going to die tomorrow, and maybe I will." These words became prophetic when on September 30th, 1955, James Dean crashed into his fate on a California highway. The silver Porsche was crushed, and Dean was gone at the age of 24, taking with him a bright future and a budding career. His sudden death not only shocked the world, but also created an irreplaceable legend: Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was more than just a star. He embodied an entire cinematic era with his bowler hat, small mustache, and hesitant gait. The image of the little tramp transcended all language barriers to touch the hearts of millions of viewers around the world. He was a creative genius who turned comedy into art and transformed the silence of silent films into a deeply emotional language. However, behind the stage lights was a man full of contradictions. Chaplin was often embroiled in emotional scandals that stirred public opinion. At the age of 35, he married Lita Gray when she was only 16. The marriage quickly fell apart, leaving behind a series of accusations of emotional control and manipulation that haunted public opinion for many years. The controversy did not stop there. Actress Joan Barry sued Chaplin for paternity in a sensational case. Despite the fact that DNA tests proved he was not the father, the court ordered him to pay financial support, a decision that further fueled controversy and severely damaged his reputation. His relationship with young women continued to raise eyebrows. Chaplin seemed attracted to vulnerability, often casting very young actresses in his films before becoming romantically involved with them. The pattern was so consistent that it became a dark shadow over his artistic brilliance. Chaplin faced further trouble in the 1950s, this time from politics, amid widespread anti-communist sentiment in the U.S. He was accused of having leftist views and was the subject of an investigation that would change his life forever. In 1952, while in Europe, Chaplin was unexpectedly denied re-entry by the U.S. government, an unprecedented decision for a famous artist, especially one who had lived in the U.S. for decades. Gable. Clark Gable, the man with the charming smile, the elegant demeanor, and the gaze that could make millions of hearts flutter. He was the king of classic Hollywood, the symbol of masculinity and irresistible charm. But behind that perfect image was a complicated world that the film industry tried to keep completely secret, protecting their most valuable male star at all costs. One of the most talked about stories was the controversial relationship between Gable and actress Loretta Young, his co-star in Call of the Wild. Years later, Loretta revealed that during the filming, she became pregnant with Gable's child. To protect both their careers, the studio quickly intervened. Loretta disappeared from Hollywood for a while, and then publicly adopted her own child in an elaborate setup that was just a small part of the complex web surrounding Gable's image. He was known for his tumultuous love life, including relationships that made the media wary at the time. The studios, especially MGM, operated a sophisticated media control system. They were willing to do anything to keep Gable a hero in the eyes of the public. An insider once bluntly said, "Just keep the press happy and avoid trouble with the police. Everything will be fine." Gable's temper was legendary on set. He would demand script changes, argue with directors, and sometimes refuse to work if things weren't done his way. His drinking added to his unpredictable nature, though the studio worked tirelessly to keep these incidents out of the papers. There were whispered accounts of Gable driving recklessly through Hollywood neighborhoods after drinking, with studio fixers swooping in to clean up any potential scandals. Tracy. Spencer Tracy, the epitome of classic masculinity on screen, always appeared calm, intelligent, and dignified. But behind the scenes, he was a conflicted man, torn between his ideal image and his inner struggles. Tracy battled alcoholism for most of his life, and the demons that drove him to drink made him one of Hollywood's most volatile presences. A devoted Catholic, Tracy never divorced his wife, but had a strong relationship that lasted more than 20 years with actress Katharine Hepburn. The two never publicly announced their relationship, always appearing as close friends. However, for those who knew the film industry, it was an open secret, a quiet but enduring bond that added another layer of complexity to Tracy's already complicated life. His drinking often turned him from a thoughtful, sensitive man into someone barely recognizable. He would disappear from sets for weeks without explanation, then return to work with a calm demeanor as if nothing had happened. Directors have said that working with Tracy was like walking on broken glass, always on guard. Some days he was warm and inspiring. Others, he was closed off and unpredictable. Tracy often drank until he blacked out, then woke up with no memory of the destruction he caused. On set, he could be violent and unpredictable. He once destroyed a hotel room during a drunken outburst, leaving staff terrified. His drinking made him unreliable, and producers sometimes had to delay filming just to sober him up. And behind all the ups and downs, Katharine Hepburn was his quiet support, both in life and in his career. Hollywood knew that Tracy was not an easy person to read, but he was a star that the public trusted. Studios were not afraid to stand behind him because every time he appeared on the silver screen, viewers were treated to a piece of the American ideal: strong, upright, and thoughtful. George Reeves. George Reeves, with the red and blue costume of Superman, became one of the great icons of the American small screen. As the invincible hero, he was a model of integrity and indomitable spirit, conquering the hearts of many generations of young audiences. However, Reeves' real life was full of twists and turns, and finally ended in a great mystery that has not been explained to this day. On the morning of June 16, 1959, George Reeves was found dead in his bedroom with a gunshot wound to the head. The police quickly declared it a suicide. However, this did not convince anyone, because almost everyone close to him said that Reeves showed no signs of being a desperate person. On the contrary, he was planning many new projects and was even about to get married. Part of the mystery surrounding Reeves's death was his troubled past. Reeves had been in a relationship with Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix, who was said to have close ties to the mafia. When Reeves ended the relationship and started dating a younger woman, strange things began to happen. He complained of being followed and felt unsafe, even saying he wanted to leave the entertainment industry forever. On the night of his death, guests downstairs in the house heard gunshots, but no one went to check immediately. When police arrived, they found that there were no fingerprints on the gun and no traces of gunpowder on his hands. These findings did not fit the suicide theory, raising many questions about what really happened that night. Conspiracy theories quickly spread. Was he murdered out of jealousy? Was it a well-covered assassination by powerful figures in Hollywood? Although these speculations are not supported by any concrete evidence, the truth behind George Reeves's death remains an unanswered question that continues to haunt Hollywood history. Reeves had been drinking heavily in the period leading up to his death, and some colleagues reported that he had become increasingly erratic on set. The pressure of being typecast as Superman had weighed on him, limiting his career options and pushing him toward despair. George Reeves, who was once Superman in the hearts of audiences, died in doubt and loneliness. One reporter wrote, "He saved the world, but no one could save him." Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the ideal Hollywood star: tall, charming, and romantic. In the 1950s, he was the man America admired, and studios invested heavily in his image. But behind the glamour was a truth that Hudson had to hide throughout his entire career. He was gay, a fact that could have ruined everything if discovered in an era of intense homophobia. At the time, Hollywood had created a false image, forcing him to live a life that was not his own, from a fake marriage to strict control over every aspect of his private life. Hudson once confided to a close friend, "I just want to be loved, but I have to pretend all my life to survive." He lived in fear and isolation, and even those who loved him had to live in the dark with him. No publicity, no recognition, no choice. The pressure created by this double life drove Hudson to periods of reckless behavior behind closed doors. He would throw private parties where he could momentarily be himself, but these were always at risk of exposure. The constant threat of scandal made him increasingly paranoid, and he turned to alcohol to cope with the strain of maintaining his public persona. Hudson's drinking became a concern for directors, who sometimes had to film around his hangovers. His mood swings became more pronounced as the years went on, creating a reputation for being difficult, even though the source of his struggles remained hidden from most of his colleagues. However, by 1985, the truth could no longer be hidden. Rock Hudson became the first celebrity to publicly announce that he had AIDS, a courageous decision that shocked the nation. At the time, AIDS was a taboo and stigmatized disease, but for Hudson, it was an undeniable reality. His action shocked and moved his fans. Some felt betrayed, while others couldn't help but admire his courage. John Barrymore. John Barrymore, a name once mentioned as an icon of classical theater and cinema. Born into the famous Barrymore family, he inherited not only fame, but also natural talent, a captivating voice, proud eyes, and a style that made viewers unable to take their eyes off him. In the 1920s and 30s, he was known as Prince Hamlet, a legendary actor of his generation. However, the halo is sometimes not enough to keep a person grounded. Initially, Barrymore was the embodiment of a fashionable lifestyle. Parties that lasted all night, charming wit, and unmatched style. But over time, the dark side began to appear. Forgetting lines, arriving late, or being absent for unknown reasons on set gradually became the norm. Friends and colleagues tried to pull him back from the brink, but Barrymore seemed to be drifting into a world of his own, increasingly detached from reality. His drinking became legendary and tragic. Barrymore would go on binges lasting days, after which he would appear on set completely unprepared, relying solely on his innate talent to get through scenes. Directors both feared and respected him, knowing that his brilliance was matched only by his unpredictability. His stories also shifted from glorious to bizarre, sometimes humorous, often tinged with sadness. His home was no longer a place of peace, but a stage where memories intertwined with reality in ways that concerned those closest to him. His behavior became more erratic, his temper more volatile, and his reliability as an actor increasingly questionable. His career gradually narrowed to small roles, often with a humorous tone, a way to make ends meet and pay off debts rather than to showcase his talent. One insider once remarked bitterly, "John is the only person I know who can spend an entire artistic legacy by the way he lives." Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era. With his signature physique and ability to deliver laughs without speaking, he became a symbol of eccentric charm. A close friend of Charlie Chaplin and the man who discovered Buster Keaton, Arbuckle was more than just a celebrity. He was a cornerstone of early American film comedy, one of the highest-paid actors of his time. But one fateful weekend in 1921, everything fell apart. After a party at a San Francisco hotel, he was embroiled in a serious affair involving a young actress, Virginia Rapp, who died days after the party. The news spread quickly, and sensational headlines turned him into a villain overnight. The press coverage was merciless, filled with fabrications and exaggerations that painted Arbuckle as a monster who had used his weight to assault the young woman. Outrage erupted across America. Theaters canceled shows, and the public called for boycotts. Arbuckle was put on trial, not once, but 3 times. He was eventually acquitted. The jury even issued a public apology, stating that there was no evidence of his guilt, and that a great injustice has been done. But for Hollywood, the verdict was not enough to wipe the stain from the public consciousness. The studios still turned their backs on him. Arbuckle's name was removed from posters, and his films were pulled from distribution. He was essentially blacklisted, forced to use a stage name to continue working behind the camera. From the height of his fame, he quietly retreated into the background, taking jobs that few people noticed. He tried to come back, but the shadow of the past was too big, always haunting him despite his innocence. In 1933, after more than a decade of oblivion, Arbuckle finally received a new film contract, the first sign of a chance for a rebirth. But ironically, just hours after signing the contract, he died of a heart attack at the age of 46. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis had it all. Good looks, great acting talent, and starring roles in blockbusters like Some Like It Hot and Spartacus. He was the epitome of the Hollywood dream, a shining star with the world at his feet. But behind the glamour was a life filled with tragedy, pain, and self-destruction that few could have imagined. Curtis was obsessed with fame to the point of insatiability, and his obsession eventually led him into a life of partying, flings, and eventually crippling drug addiction. He boasted about his affairs, telling of sleeping with hundreds of women, including Marilyn Monroe. But the physical pleasures didn't fill the emptiness inside him, and drugs like heroin and cocaine took over in the 1970s. "If you remember the 1970s, you didn't really live in them," Tony Curtis once quipped, hiding his pain behind humor. At the height of his fame, Curtis became increasingly difficult to work with. His demands on set grew excessive, and his mood swings frightened crew members. Directors complained about his erratic behavior, showing up late, forgetting lines, and sometimes appearing high during filming. His ego ballooned with his success, making collaboration nearly impossible. Curtis's career slowly declined as word spread about his unprofessional conduct. His demeanor became abrasive and dismissive, driving directors and producers away. 6 marriages ended in divorce, and 6 children grew up without a consistent father figure. His most famous daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, has admitted that her father was largely absent during the formative years of her life. Yet, Curtis never lost his charisma. In interviews, he remained a charming, self-aware, self-deprecating storyteller, even as his life fell apart around him. "I've turned my life into a circus, and sometimes I forget who's running the show," Tony Curtis once admitted, with the trademark smile that had made him famous. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney wasn't just a child star. He was the first child star to truly rule Hollywood. In the 1930s and 40s, with his Andy Hardy films, Rooney became a box office powerhouse, beloved by audiences across America. At one point, he was the highest-paid actor in the country, despite not being old enough to drink. But behind that bubbly, smiling exterior was a soul that never found peace. Rooney's personal life was a chaotic whirlwind that seemed to never slow down. He married 8 times to some of the most beautiful and famous women in Hollywood, from beauty queens to stars like Ava Gardner. But none of the marriages lasted. His relationships were a series of jealousy, infidelity, and tabloid headlines that seemed to follow him wherever he went. On set, he was an unpredictable genius, sometimes cheerful and lively, making everyone laugh with his antics, but he could easily turn angry, making directors wary of his volatile moods. He was known to throw tantrums when things didn't go his way, a habit formed during his years as a child star when studios catered to his every whim. Rooney spent lavishly, blowing millions of dollars on gambling, partying, and bad investment decisions. He lived as if money would never stop flowing, and when it did, he found himself nearly bankrupt multiple times throughout his career. Not only that, but his loved ones also betrayed him. In his twilight years, he accused his stepchildren of abuse and embezzlement, adding another layer of tragedy to his already complicated life. "I never had a childhood. I just had a career," Mickey Rooney once said with rare candor. He lived as if the spotlight was the only thing that kept him alive. Even in his 90s, Rooney continued to take roles and appeared on television because if he stopped, he would have to face himself and the emptiness that fame had created. Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty was more than just a star. He was a force of nature. His good looks, charisma, and charm were irresistible. But Beatty wasn't Hollywood's pursuer. Hollywood was his pursuer. Along the way, he left a trail of drama and mystery that few could match, operating with a calculated chaos that became his trademark. Beatty's legend is written through his affairs. It's said he slept with thousands of women. Some say it was more than 12,000, a number that seems impossible until you look at the breadth of his conquests. From co-stars to models to politicians' wives, Beatty never missed an opportunity to indulge his desires. But these weren't just random hookups. They were part of a larger pattern of control that defined his career. On set, Beatty was a control freak of legendary proportions. Directors struggled with him because if a scene didn't go his way, production would stop until he got what he wanted. He would demand countless takes, question every camera angle, and often rewrite dialogue on the spot. Stories circulated of productions going wildly over budget and schedule due to Beatty's perfectionism and need to dominate every aspect of filmmaking. Beatty's relationships were notoriously short-lived, with the exception of one, a 9-year relationship with Annette Bening that led to marriage, surprising Hollywood since Batty had long been the industry's most elusive bachelor. One actress once admitted, "I've never known anyone more charming or more dangerous," capturing the duality that made Batty both irresistible and feared. He didn't just have the ability to make or break a movie with a phone call. He understood the power dynamics of Hollywood and used them to shape his legend. Sometimes for his art, sometimes for his own ego. With Batty, there were no accidents or burnouts. He kept going, fueled by his desire to be in control and his desire to be the center of attention whenever he walked into a room. Unlike many stars who flamed out, Batty managed his chaos carefully, ensuring it never completely derailed his career. He used his reputation to build power rather than destroy it, making him one of the most successful actor-producers in Hollywood history. Dangerous, not because he lost control, but because he maintained it with such ruthless precision. Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole was as wild off-screen as he was captivating on it. Known for his role in Lawrence of Arabia, O'Toole lived like a man with no rules or boundaries, mixing extraordinary talent with self-destruction in a way that became almost poetic. His blue eyes and aristocratic bearing belied a man determined to test every limit life placed before him. He drank so heavily that it became part of his legend. Friends described nights with him that spiraled into chaos, filled with broken glass, shouting, and unpredictable behavior that could turn from charming to frightening in an instant. He once drank himself into a coma and had to undergo surgery that nearly killed him. Even after that brush with death, he didn't stop his dangerous lifestyle. On set, he was brilliant but unstable. Directors had to work around his hangovers and unpredictable moods. He often showed up late or disappeared for days without explanation, leaving productions in limbo. Richard Burton, himself no stranger to excess, once remarked that O'Toole was the only actor who scared him with his drinking. His wild behavior wasn't just about alcohol. He had a sharp tongue and made powerful enemies with his insults and refusal to play by Hollywood's rules. He would publicly mock studio executives and challenge authority figures, seemingly unconcerned with the career consequences of his actions. O'Toole's life was one long, dangerous party that often teetered on the edge of disaster. Though admired for his talent, many feared the destruction that followed him everywhere. His body paid the price for his excesses. By the 1970s, he was suffering from serious health problems related to his drinking, including pancreatitis and intestinal issues that required part of his stomach and intestines to be removed. Despite the chaos, there was always something elegant about O'Toole's destruction. He approached debauchery with the same intensity and commitment he brought to Shakespeare. He wasn't just another drunk actor. He was an artist, even in his excess, quoting poetry as he smashed glasses against walls, bringing a peculiar dignity to his downward spirals that made him all the more fascinating and all the more dangerous to those caught in his orbit. Montgomery Clif. Montgomery Clif was one of Hollywood's most gifted actors, but behind his haunting eyes was a life filled with suffering and destruction that seemed almost predestined. He started as a rising star, known for his emotional depth and brooding good looks, setting hearts aflutter across America while bringing a new, sensitive masculinity to the silver screen. But tragedy shattered him in ways few could have imagined. In 1956, Clif was in a horrific car crash that left his face disfigured, fundamentally altering both his appearance and his psyche. After the accident, he became addicted to painkillers and alcohol, substances that temporarily dulled his physical pain but accelerated his emotional unraveling. His behavior changed completely following the crash. He grew paranoid, reclusive, and difficult to work with. Friends described him as a ghost of the man he once was, haunted by the loss of his beauty in an industry that had valued him largely for it. On set, he would break down or lash out without warning. Directors who had once clamored to work with him now approached with caution, aware of his fragility. He was consumed by guilt, self-hatred, and pain that seemed to have no bottom. His performances remained remarkable, but the toll on his body and mind grew increasingly visible. Directors noted that he could barely remember his lines, requiring cue cards for even simple scenes. Yet somehow, when the cameras rolled, he could still access emotional depths that left audiences spellbound. Clift's personal relationships suffered tremendously. He isolated himself from friends who tried to help him, spending days locked away in his apartment, with only alcohol and pills for company. His inner circle dwindled to just a few loyal friends who watched helplessly as he descended further into addiction and despair. Elizabeth Taylor, his close friend and co-star, once said, "Monty was the only person I know who was more tortured than me." Their friendship became one of Hollywood's most poignant relationships. Two beautiful, troubled souls who recognized in each other the weight of fame and expectation. By the early 1960s, Clift was barely employable. Insurance companies demanded enormous premiums to cover productions he was involved with, knowing his unreliability and health issues could derail filming at any moment. Yet his talent was so extraordinary that directors were still willing to take the risk. On July 23, 1966, Montgomery Clif was found dead in his bedroom at the age of 45. The official cause was a heart attack, but those who knew him understood it was the culmination of years of self-destruction. Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper wasn't just an actor, he was a revolution. His wildly unpredictable behavior, fierce artistic vision, and determination to break every rule made him one of Hollywood's most dangerous and influential figures. In an industry built on control, Hopper was chaos personified, and the film world was never quite the same after he stormed through it. Hopper's legendary substance abuse began early in his career and quickly reached mythic proportions. By the late 1960s, he was consuming extraordinary amounts of drugs and alcohol daily. During the filming of Easy Rider, his breakthrough directorial success, Hopper was reportedly under the influence throughout production, often making impulsive creative decisions that terrified producers, but ultimately created a counterculture masterpiece. His behavior on sets became the stuff of Hollywood legend. While filming Apocalypse Now in the Philippines, Hopper's drug use reached such extremes that director Francis Ford Coppola struggled to contain him. He would disappear into the jungle for days, returning with bizarre stories and increasingly erratic behavior. Yet somehow, his portrayal of a manic photojournalist became one of the film's most memorable performances. Perhaps because the line between acting and reality had completely disappeared. Hopper's violent temper was equally notorious. He once fired a gun inside his own home during an argument with his wife. Another time, he attempted a dangerous stunt involving dynamite while intoxicated, nearly killing himself and others on set. Directors learned to expect the unexpected, knowing that hiring Hopper meant inviting both genius and madness into their productions. By the early 1980s, Hopper had hit rock bottom. Living in a self-imposed exile in a small town in New Mexico, he was consuming up to half a gallon of rum, 30 beers, and 3 grams of cocaine daily. He experienced drug-induced psychosis, once stripping naked in the jungle believing he was being hunted. Hollywood considered him unemployable, a brilliant talent destroyed by his own excesses. Yet, unlike many others on this list, Hopper's story includes a remarkable third act. He achieved sobriety in the mid-1980s and staged one of Hollywood's most unexpected comebacks, delivering chilling performances in films like Blue Velvet and Speed. The dangerous energy that had nearly destroyed him was channeled into his art, creating some of the most memorable villains in cinema history. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart's tough guy persona wasn't just acting, it was a reflection of the man himself. Behind the iconic trench coat and cigarette was a complicated, often difficult personality that could be as hard-edged off-screen as the characters he portrayed. His journey from Broadway actor to Hollywood legend was paved with conflicts, drinking, and a rebellious streak that made him both respected and feared. Known for his heavy drinking, Bogart once remarked, "The problem with the world is that everyone is a few drinks behind." His consumption was legendary, even by Hollywood standards, and he was often found in his trailer with a bottle between takes. Yet, unlike many alcoholic actors, Bogart maintained a strange discipline. He never drank before 6 p.m. while filming, and was known for his professionalism on set despite his vices. What made Bogart truly dangerous wasn't just his drinking, but his combative nature. He had no patience for pretension or authority figures. Studio executives approached him with caution, knowing he wouldn't hesitate to voice his opinions forcefully. He frequently clashed with directors, challenging their vision if it didn't align with his own. Jack Warner of Warner Brothers once said dealing with Bogart was like trying to hold a grenade after you've pulled the pin. His temper was infamous. When pushed, Bogart could become physically intimidating, and several stories circulated about altercations with producers and fellow actors. Yet this same intensity made him magnetic on screen. Audiences could sense the authentic edge beneath his performances. A man who genuinely understood the darker aspects of human nature. Bogart's relationships were equally tumultuous until he met Lauren Bacall. His first 3 marriages ended in disaster, marred by jealousy and conflict. His third wife, Mayo Methot, was nicknamed Sluggy because of their frequent physical altercations. Their relationship was so volatile that friends called them the Battling Bogarts. They would drink heavily and engage in screaming matches that sometimes turned physical, with both parties emerging bruised the next day. Despite his rough edges, Bogart commanded loyalty from those who knew him well. He stood by friends during the McCarthy era, when many others turned their backs, showing a moral courage that matched his physical fearlessness. This complexity made him more than just another difficult star. It made him an icon whose authenticity resonated with post-war America. Richard Burton. Richard Burton possessed one of the most magnificent speaking voices in theatrical history, a Welsh-tinged instrument that could bring Shakespeare to life like no other. His classical training and natural gifts should have made him the greatest actor of his generation. Instead, he became equally famous for his turbulent relationship with Elizabeth Taylor and his self-destructive alcoholism that ultimately overshadowed his immense talent. Burton's drinking was apocalyptic in scale. During the filming of Night of the Iguana, he consumed so much alcohol that the production had to schedule around his binges. He would disappear for days, emerging bleary-eyed, but somehow still capable of delivering performances of staggering power. His doctor once told him his liver was so damaged that if he didn't stop drinking, he would die. Burton's response was to order another drink. His volatile relationship with Elizabeth Taylor became Hollywood's most famous romance. They married and divorced twice, their passion spinning between love and hatred with frightening intensity. Their fights were legendary, often public, and always dramatic. They would throw expensive jewelry at each other, smash hotel rooms, and scream accusations that made headlines around the world. Yet their chemistry was undeniable, a combustible mixture that fascinated the public for decades. On set, Burton could be brilliant one day and impossible the next. Directors spoke of his ability to memorize complicated dialogue after a night of heavy drinking, delivering it perfectly despite his physical state. But they also recalled his dark moods, his refusal to take direction, and his growing cynicism about his own career. Burton had contempt for many of the films he made, openly calling them rubbish, while cashing enormous paychecks. By the 1970s, the effects of his lifestyle were increasingly visible. His once handsome face became bloated, his legendary voice occasionally slurred. He underwent a brief period of sobriety, but always returned to alcohol, unable to escape its grip. The theatrical community watched in dismay as one of their most gifted performers squandered his potential film after film. Burton once wrote in his diary, "I am as far away from greatness as Everest is from the sea." This self-awareness made his decline all the more tragic. He knew what he was destroying, but seemed powerless to stop it. When he died at 58 from a cerebral hemorrhage, the theatrical world mourned not just his passing, but the greater legacy he might have left had he conquered his demons. Orson Welles. Orson Welles wasn't just ahead of his time. He existed outside of it entirely. A prodigy who directed Citizen Kane, widely considered the greatest film ever made. At just 25 years old, Welles possessed a creative genius that Hollywood both covered and feared. His refusal to compromise, his gigantic ego, and his increasingly self-destructive behavior made him perhaps the most brilliant yet ultimately dangerous force the studio system ever encountered. Welles's problems weren't rooted in drugs or alcohol, but in his pathological inability to work within any system of constraints. After the controversial release of Citizen Kane, which alienated powerful newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, Welles found himself increasingly at odds with studio executives who wanted to control his visionary but expensive tendencies. On sets, Welles was a hurricane of creative energy and impossible demands. He would film hundreds of takes, scrap entire scenes on a whim, and redesign sets overnight if they didn't match his vision. His perfectionism drove producers mad and budgets into the stratosphere. When directing The Magnificent Ambersons, he shot so much footage that the studio eventually took the film away from him and recut it entirely, a pattern that would repeat throughout his career. His personal appetites matched his creative ones. Welles ate enormous meals, often consuming multiple steaks at a sitting, along with several bottles of wine. His weight ballooned, making him increasingly difficult to cast as he aged. He would accept acting roles in terrible films for quick money to fund his own projects, many of which remained unfinished at his death. Perhaps most dangerous was his self-sabotaging nature. When given opportunities to direct major studio films, he would inevitably create conflict, miss deadlines, or make demands so outrageous that he was removed from projects. He seemed almost determined to prove that Hollywood couldn't contain his genius, even if it meant destroying his own career in the process. And there you have it, the wild, untamed truth behind Hollywood's most dangerous legends. These stars didn't just light up the screen, they burned with intensity, often leaving chaos in their wake. If you found their stories as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment, letting us know which actor shocked you the most. And for more untold tales from Hollywood's golden age and beyond, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the drama. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.